Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we are back in Free Code Camp, and today we are building a React project, specifically the recipe box. Now, what is our objective? Well, we want to be able to create a recipe that has a name, we want to be able to create and ingredients, and then see an index view where all those are visible, click in those recipes to view it, edit those recipes, delete those recipes, and also we want to do it in the local storage. It's going to look something like this. Before we start a project, we should always kind of understand what it is we're trying to build, especially if they give it to us. So we want an accordion. We want to be able to edit what's in here. And we'll just go ahead and put my name. When we edit that recipe, it then adds it. We also want the ability to delete it entirely. We'll delete this bottom one, and then when we refresh the page here, you'll see that it's actually in the local storage using the HTML5 API local storage, and not just hard-coded or pulling from a database or anything like that. So that's what we're going to do. You're going to see this is mine. I made it pretty basic. We'll call this recipe 2. And then we'll put just 1, 2, 3, and I don't know, my last name. We'll then save the recipe, so we'll have the ability to edit recipes, delete recipes, all that sort of stuff, and it's all in the local storage as well. So that is what we're going to do. We're going to be doing this on our local machine, and if you guys want to export it out to CodePen, you're welcome to. We'll be using React BootStrap, and that's basically it. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright guys, let's go ahead and get a new project started. We'll be using the Create React app rather, which is Facebook has kindly provided us to get us a nice working development environment going. If you don't have it installed, I suggest you install it globally. I use it all the time. I use it for pretty much every single project I make. It just gets us going. So create React app, and then the project name. In this case, I'm just going to call it FCC-recipe. That's going to go ahead and install a couple things. It's going to basically just install everything that we want. That's just so that we can have a nice working environment. Now we're going to, when it's done, install one more dependency, which is going to be React Bootstrap. The cool thing about React Bootstrap is it allows us to have a bunch of components that are based off of the popular CSS and JavaScript library Bootstrap, and we can use those. So definitely check out the documentation if you're not familiar with it. And once this is done installing, we'll go ahead and do that as well. And then when we start, we'll go ahead and instantiate all of our standard stuff. All right. Any second now. Now this is one of the more fun projects, in my opinion. The Markdown previewer, which comes first, and then the camper leaderboard, which comes second in order of the projects. Those are pretty basic. Those are you just go and you get some data, 2 clicks. This one, we're adding, we're deleting, we're editing. We're basically doing a full RESTful, all the adding, deleting, editing, updating, all that sort of stuff, and getting. So we're doing the 4 calls, right? And that's what makes it really interesting. Is you're essentially creating a mock backend by using local storage and state, which I kind of like. This is my first time using local storage. I thought it was going to be much more complex, but it's actually pretty straightforward. I don't know that I'll use it in any applications moving forward unless it makes sense. But for the most part, I'll probably just have a backend for applications. But if I don't want to spin up a Node server or a Express app and a database in MongoDB, Mongoose, I just want something that can maybe not be the safest or may be deleted, I'll consider it down the road. Alright, now that we have the React app installed, go ahead and npm install React-bootstrap-save. Again, this is going to give us the components. One thing to keep in mind is, I've been using React Bootstrap quite a bit for the last 2 projects. They don't actually include the style sheet, which is kind of funny. Because it doesn't really depend too much on the style sheet. You're really downloading it for the components. So take a minute to go ahead and get the... Oh, excuse me. We need to CD into the FCC-YouTube and then install. And now that we did that, go ahead and install React BootStrap. But we need to actually go and retrieve the style sheet from the internet. You can get the latest version. That's what I'm going to do. And we'll get started by throwing that CSS style sheet in there before we forget and then are just confused. So once this go ahead and launches, this will take just a minute. The next two of React projects that we'll be working on is the Game of Life, and then there's also, what was it? There's also the Game of Life and a roguelike dungeon crawler game. So I feel like the first two were okay. Like in terms of skill set, they taught you the absolute basics. The recipe box was definitely a... So if you go easy, the recipe box would fall into the medium in terms of the difficulty scale. And then the Game of Life and the roguelike dungeon crawler game, I feel like skips hard and goes to extremely hard for a lot of people who aren't familiar with it, especially in terms of time commitment. But again, these projects, at this point, they're expecting you to put 40 hours into these. I don't put anywhere near that amount. I don't have the time, to be honest. All right, so let's go ahead and install our dependencies. Now that we've installed BootStrap, go ahead and install all of our dependencies. And then we'll launch the application with the yarn start, and we should be ready to go. A little bit of prep to get going in these projects, but sometimes people cut this out when they do their videos, other people, right? And if you're really a novice, you might get lost over the steps. And at the very least, if you're watching this and you're like, dude, we all know how to install dependencies and what dependencies to install just by you saying it, well, skip up a few minutes. Like, so I try to make it so that somebody who is intermediate or literally has no background at all can kind of jump into this sort of stuff. So again, we're using git bash as our command here. So let's go ahead and launch our application using yarn start. And what this is going to do is just going to basically get us up and running. And while that is going, we're going to open up a tab here. We're going to go ahead and open up that directory, and you'll see all of our wonderful files that have been installed. Just going to open folder. And now we have FCC recipe. And you'll notice if you installed everything, this is what you should be getting right here. It's just going to be a little page saying, you know, thank you for launching a React app. React is much better than Angular, all that. So they're going to start talking shit. So actually, that'd be so gangster if Facebook just said, fuck you, Angular, when you launch the React app. But unfortunately, Mark Zuckerberg runs Facebook and not myself. Or I'm going to launch the wrong application, and that's also going to be an issue. So you'll see here that I went into FCC YouTube. So let's go ahead and launch the right application this time, which is FCC recipe. I don't even know how that happened. I could have sworn I've said, nope, I said FCC YouTube. Looks like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So that'll launch in just a second. Okay, so the way that we're going to start this entire application off is first we're going to import all our files, the style sheets, the modules, the components. We're going to import all that, and then we're going to set everything up to work with state, and then from there we're going to go ahead and just add local storage as an after effect. That's really how I like to do this, is do it piece by piece. That's going to be our game plan here. So this is if you installed everything correctly, this is what you get. So let's go ahead and get started. We've wasted enough time on this introduction. First, let's jump into public. As I mentioned, we are going to add the BootStrap CSS file, which is over here. And then while we're at it, we'll go ahead and change this title. And this will say something like recipe box. Cool. And bam, bam, bam. So now that we've added that, that'll be the last time we ever need to come to that page. Pretty cool. And let's go ahead and jump into app.js. This is where all our logic's going to be. We're going to clean everything out of here except this div app. And then we're also going to go ahead and get rid of this logo. We don't care about that either. And now that we've done that, let's start thinking about what it is that we need to get going here. Well, if you remember correctly, in our example, we had an accordion. So we're going to go ahead and import the accordion file. Remember the accordion, this drop down. Now in our accordion, we're also going to have a panel. Those are essentially the headers and the container. That's all that is. We're going to use that as well. And then we're going to use the button, which is going to allow us to style a button with some basic CSS to go with it. And then the button toolbar, which is going to allow our buttons to kind of line up nicely and look nice. And we're going to use a modal. That will be our pop-out that you guys saw earlier when I was doing the demo. And then we're also going to be using the form group, which is going to group our stuff together, our inputs rather. Let's use words and not things and stuffs and items, right? We're going to it's going to group our inputs. And then we're going to have the labels for our inputs, which is the control label here. And then we are going to have the form control, which is just another class to make everything look nice, right? For our input. That is for our input, the label for our input, group the input, our modal, which is our pop-up, the button toolbar, which groups our buttons, our button, the panel, which is contained within the accordion, and then of course the accordion functionality. A lot of stuff there. It's all going to make sense when we go in there. So just know that that's all we're really doing in terms of imports. We're done, and of course I want to make this second here. Bam. All right, so we have our imports done. If you're a little confused by it, don't sweat it. We're going to go piece by piece. Now, we know that we need recipes. So how would we want to define our recipes? Our recipes, being plural, that's going to be an array, right? So let's go ahead and define our state here in the get-go, where state is equal to recipes. Now, I'm going to initialize recipes to have one recipe in it. Now, what would a recipe have in it? Well, it's going to have, and these are objects, right? We're going to have two things in it. It's going to be an object, and it's going to have a recipe name. And for the sake of argument, we'll call this, I don't know, call this Dylan. And then for the ingredients, what makes up Dylan? You know what? I think I spelled ingredients wrong all throughout my other video. And so if I spell it wrong again right now, I spelled it with an A. Or when I did it, and someone in live stream chat, and I forgot to check how to spell ingredients. I am the coding god. I am not the spelling god. All right, so let's just keep that straight. So what makes up Dylan? Well, clearly he is sexy. Also, spelling champ, and on top of that, mega smart, right? So that's what makes up Dylan. All right, just having fun here, guys. I'm not really full of myself, I assure you. So that is our object. It has a recipe name, what makes up me, and then that's me, and then it has what makes me up, right? And so again, spaghetti, meat, breadcrumbs, and cheese. I don't know, whatever you want, right? So how are we going to output that? Well, let's worry about the HTML before we worry about the logic. We're going to get into right here. We're going to want to render out our recipe. And remember, we imported our accordion. Now, if you're wondering, all right, well, how do you know how to use the accordion? In the React BootStrap documentation, just Control F till you get accordion, and it'll all make sense, right? Now, in here, we want to output a panel of each one of the accordions. So let's go ahead and map out a panel for each one of the recipes. And because we have a couple different, we want to just, it's an array. Let's throw one or two more copies of this. And we'll just throw Dylan 1, Dylan 2, Dylan 3, because like I tell my girlfriend, you wish there was more than one of me. Damn, I didn't even say that right. All right, so let's go ahead and continue on. That sounded much cooler in my head. All right, so here we are, failing in our own video. We want to output our recipe, right? So our array that we took, So instead of saying this.state.recipe, I don't want to have to repeat myself a bunch, right? Let's go ahead and create this const variable, and we're going to deconstruct it, and instead we're going to pass in recipe here. We're just going to set it equal to this.state. That's going to allow us to do a little shorthand here. And we're going to say recipes. Let's add an S on there. So recipes.map. This is going to create a new version of our, it's going to output using JavaScript functions, the recipe, the current index rather, and then we want to go ahead and get that index value for later. We'll talk about why we're going to want that in a second. Now, in here, we just want to go ahead and create this arrow function and then output some stuff within the accordion. Now, I told you we're going to use a panel, so let's go ahead and use that, /panel. Now, our panel takes in a few items. What does it take in? Well, it takes in a header. So what do we want? What do we want our bar to be, right? If we have our header here, we want it to be the name of our recipe. We want to click it. We want to see the recipe we want, so we click it, and then we get the ingredients. So that's going to be the recipe dot recipe name. So that gives us a header. The next thing that we want to add is the event key. This allows the accordion to know which one to drop down and which one to open up. And so the event key, I told you we were going to use the index here, and that's what I used for the event key. Now, the other thing we need is we need a key. Now, the reason for this is when mapping out when iterating through an array, you have to assign a key to your JSX so that it can keep track of everything, basically. If something moves, something gets added, deleted, it needs a key to reference to. Essentially a primary key, if you want to think in database terms. So now that we have that, we have our panel. I believe we should have had something work. So what is failing here? I am failing. What am I failing on? Oh. We have a panel, we have a header. Maybe we need something in here. We'll just say h1/h1 test. Nope. I am failing somewhere. So we have recipes.map, and then we have recipe, we have index. Oh, I see. I have one too many right here. There we go. So a little logic error, no big deal. And then I needed this one right here. Okay, everything's taken care of now. All right, so now we should be able to see our panels. It's compiling. Give it just 1 second. And you'll see we have there's nothing in it, so they're not going to open. But you can see we have our 3 headings. Now, this looks kind of like shit. I never like it going to the edge. So let's go ahead and just use some regular BootStrap. And on our app here, just add container. And that's going to bring everything in. That's just some basic BootStrap CSS. And you'll see that it's going to take it from the edge and bring it all in. So now we look like professional UI, UX people. We look legit. All right. So let's actually put some stuff out. Now, in mine, I just go ahead and list out the ingredients as an LI. You can style it however you want. I found this to be the way that made the most sense to me. Now here, we have our OL, and then we want to map out our LIs because we have ingredients. Again, it's an array, so we're going to map it out. So let's take our recipe dot ingredients, and then we're going to map that out. And in here, we're going to just take in, I'll just call it item. Ingredient might have been a better way of doing it. I typically try to name it the singular version so that it makes sense directly what I'm talking about, right? Item is close enough in this case to ingredient, but recipe of recipes, item of ingredients should be ingredient. That's just something that I do. I don't think there's a convention to it one way or the other. But I've noticed a lot of other developers that I respect do it as well. So here we have our LI. So we want to output an LI. And again, because we're iterating through array, we want to go ahead and set a key. And in this case, I'm just going to pass an item. All the ingredients should be unique. And then we want to just output item. And just so that we can see that it's not everything's being outputted is different, let's go ahead and save that. And close that. You'll see it opened. The other ones, Bootstrap's components are taking care of this wonderful, what's the word I'm looking for? Wonderful accordion stuff. The closing and the opening. Then we have sexy 3, sexy 2, sexy 1. So much sexy. Now, cool. So what do we want to do next? Well, let's actually just build out the rest of it, and we'll worry about sort of the functionality after. We'll worry about building things out. So within our panel, remember we want to be able to delete things, we want to be able to update things, and we want to be able to actually that's all we want to do in the panel. So remember that button toolbar, we have that. So let's go ahead and use our button toolbar. Oops. And let's fix that as well. So we're going to have 2 buttons in our button toolbar. The first button is going to be for deleting, and the way that you assign classes to the button is with the B-style prop. And this is danger / button. And then on here, or in here, we're going to say something like delete recipe. And then go ahead and copy that. And then in here, we are going to have edit recipe. And that actually needs to be default, so my mistake there. And if you're like me, every piece of your code you check after adding a couple more lines. So let's make sure that we are all on the same page here, and that the React app and I are. So that should be red. So we have a problem, which we need to solve. B style. Oh, BS style. So it's BS style. But other than that, everything looks like it's in place. We have a delete and we have an edit button. We'll come back to the functions that we're going to write as we move forward. So cool. All right. Now that we did that, let's jump back in. Now we're out of our accordion. We want to add a add button that is outside of the accordion, right? Because this is when, if there's no recipes, then there's no accordion to output. So or no panels to output, so we don't want it in the panel, rather. And we don't want it to be part of accordion, so it's going to be right outside here. And we're going to have a little button. And this one's just going to have the BS style equal to primary. And on here, it's going to close that, / button. And now that we did that, we're going to go ahead and say add recipe. Save it. And so we get a nice little add recipe. Cool. Now, we have a couple modules we need to create, but we're going to worry about that after we do an add and a delete. Or a delete. So delete. We know that we need to reset the state of recipe, because here we are, we have these states with these default values that we're loading in there, and we want to actually delete a recipe. How do we do that? Well, let's go ahead and define a function. In this case, it's going to be delete recipe will be the name of it. And again, I know we just a reminder, we're going to take care of the local storage at the end. Once we get it working with state and working on our JavaScript, it's very easy to get the local, but we're just going to worry about that later. So in this case, we have this delete recipe. So how do we call functions? Well, we want, when you delete this on click, to go ahead and call this callback function. And on here, we want to pass in a couple things. The first thing is, by default, it passes in an event. We're not actually going to do anything with that, but we might as well pass it in. This we want to say this dot delete recipe. Very nice. Now, in delete recipe, we are going to, you'll see here, how do we know which recipe to delete? Well, we can actually just pass the index in. Remember, we have the index here that we're setting the event key and the key. We can pass the index in, and we can actually splice that value out of a duplicate of our state. And because you're not supposed to mutate the state directly in React, so we're going to go instead to delete the copied version and then just reset the state like that. So that's what we're going to do. So here, you'll see we'll pass in, we'll just name that index so that everybody's on the same page. We'll say let recipes equal, so we're creating a local version here, this.state.recipes.slice. So this will create a copy of the recipe state without mutating it. And then we want to take recipes.splice, because we want to cut it out of our duplicate here, the index, and then 1, right? Now that we've done that, oops, and make sure you spell splice correctly. Now that we've done that, we are then going to set the state, this dot set state, and because we named it the same thing of recipes, we only need to pass that in because it will assume that we're setting the state recipes equal to the variable recipes. So now that we're good there, let's go ahead and test it, make sure everything's gravy. Gravy. Everything's gravy. I'm so hip. So when we'll delete the middle one, and bam. So now we have Dylan 1 and 3. Now again, we're just doing this on the local, so when we refresh it, it's not going to be there. Not a big deal. We're going to come back to that. All right, so we've deleted that. Put a little note here. Deletes a recipe. You can probably tell that by the name, but we're going to have about 7 or 8 functions by the end of this, so I like to put names on here. So we deleted the recipe. Very nice. Let's go ahead and add a recipe. Now, to add a recipe, we need to have a modal. Modal, again, is just a simple pop-up. The way the modal works in here, let's go ahead and create our modal. We have this show, which means do you want to actually show the modal right now? And this is going to be equal to this.state.showAdd. Now, showAdd is a state variable that we haven't, or a state parameter we haven't set yet. And then on hide is what you want to set the value of the when this.close runs, essentially, which is a function we have yet to write. So we're going to do all that right now. So this.showAdd is something that I wrote. And let's go up to here to our state. And then we have this thing called showAdd. And by default, we always want it to be false, right? We don't want it to just open up, say, add a recipe. Now, you could write some logic where if your local storage has, the only case that would make sense is if your local storage has 0 recipes in it, why not just launch it right away? I didn't do that, but that's just a thought if you guys want to go the extra mile. So we're going to go ahead and add our state show false there. Very nice. And we also want to go ahead and create that close function. Remember, we have this.close being passed in there. That's going to actually close it. And all we have to do here is, where am I? Create this close callback here. Set close is equal to a function, close callback function, and in here we're going to say if this dot this .state .show add. So if that's true, go ahead and set the state to false. That's all. So that's going to go from hiding it, from showing it to hiding it, basically. So set state, pass in our object. In this case, we called that show add, and we're going to set that equal to false. So if it's true, set it to false. Cool. So that's going to hide it. So how do we show it? And what are we showing? Well, we'll get to that, right? So in our add button, before we do anything else, we have our this.show add recipe. All we want to do is, where is my code here? Create this function. We're going to call this function here. And in our function, we're going to pass in a simple key that's going to say show add, because we're going to have two modals, one for show add and one for show edit. And in this case, I just created a function since we're doing it already. I'm going to set this on click. So when you click our add recipe, we just want to go ahead and pass in this blah, 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 and then this dot open, and in here, the string show add. Now let's go ahead and define our open function up here. So open, here we are. Open is going to be equal to a function, and in there we're going to have our state, and then we're going to go ahead and comma that out and create our arrow function. Cool. So this, let's put a note here, closes a modal, and here this is going to open a modal. Very nice. Now how do we do it? Well, you can just say this dot set state, and remember, state's really nothing but an object. So in here we can go ahead and just pass in that state, and we'll find the key. So if it's show add, or which like this, right? So this is show add, it's going to go find that show add, or later on when we do show edit, it'll find that as well. Now what do we want to do here? We actually want to set that to true because we want it to open in this case, just the exact opposite. And of course, this needs to be an object, so we need to pass in an object. Very nice. So we've now opened our modal and set that to true. And we are good to go on our add. Now let's go ahead and see. I think we actually might have to have some more stuff in our modal, but let's see if that's working. So you'll see, bam, there's nothing in it, but you can see something's changed. So let's go ahead and fix it so that there's stuff in it. So back to our modal right here, we want to, in our modal, we want to add some stuff. We want to add a modal.header, and that's going to have a prop called close button. Essentially, that's going to be our close X button. That's going to allow us to click an X to get out. And then in here, we're going to have modal.title. So we're creating our header of the modal right now, right? And we want that to be add recipe. Very nice. And finally, we're going to have modal body, and we officially have set up basically the basics of our modal. All right. So modal body. Now, what do we want in the body? Well, we want two things. One, we want a way of putting in a recipe. So we want to put in a recipe, which means we need a recipe name and ingredients. Let's start with the recipe name. Remember, we had that form group, so let's go ahead and create our form group. Very nice. And now that we have our form group, let's go ahead and create our control label. This is going to just be the label for our stuff, not cache. And this is going to be that. So now we have our label, and the next thing that we need is our input for recipe name. In this case, it is going to be form control, and we're going to have to add some properties to this in just a second here, as well as a function to set the state of our newest recipe. So in here, let's go ahead and set it, give ourselves a little space. So the type of input is going to be a text input. Then we are also going to have a value. Now the value is what is going to be the name of the state that we're connecting it to. We haven't actually defined this yet, so let's go ahead and do that in our state application here. So this won't be in local storage because we don't really care if they remember, if the modal pulls up. It'd actually be bad because it doesn't, the local storage doesn't need to keep the last added value. We want that to clear out after a page resets. It makes more sense that way. So we were going to create this newest recipe, and because this is supposed to be added to this, we want it to follow the same format. So that's going to be an object. In there, we're going to have a recipe name. You go ahead and set that equal to null, and then you can go ahead and set ingredients to an empty array as well. Now, one thing to note is I didn't put any logic in to make sure that there's at least one ingredient or at least one character in the newest recipe. If this was a production environment and not just kind of a fun side project, that's definitely something that you'd want to do. So if you take your project super seriously, and more so than I do in this case, that's one thing that you can add. So newest recipe dot recipe name. So that's going to be the value of it. And then we are going to have a placeholder, and placeholder will say something like enter recipe name. And then finally, we are going to have an onChange function that's going to then set the state of that value. So onChange, we set this equal to a callback function that takes an event. And event is going to call this function that we call this dot update new recipe. And we're also going to take in at this point actually, this is it. We're going to take an update new recipe, and that's going to take in the event.target.value. That's going to give us whatever is in our input box. Event.target.value. Very nice. So let's go ahead and write this update new recipe. It's going to look pretty similar to this one that we wrote, the delete recipe, except we're going to update the new recipe. So here we will say go ahead and take what's here and add update newest recipe dot recipe name. That's basically what we're doing there. And we're going to go ahead and set create a function called update. Let's just call it newest recipe name. And in here we're going to take in the I just put value, take in the value. And we're going to say this dot set state. Now, one thing, and mind you, I've only been doing React for about 3 weeks, is that there may be a better way of doing some of the things that I am doing. So I encourage you to comment below if there is. So one thing to keep in mind. So here we pass in not only the value, but we're actually going to need to pass in the ingredients. And the reason for that is I didn't understand a way to reset the state entirely without having the value of the ingredients as well. So I didn't want to lose that value. And now that I'm thinking about it, I just realized a better way of doing it. One of the great things about doing this is I always learn what I'm doing wrong. So we're going to say let let newest recipe equal this dot state dot newest recipe dot. You can't slice it. Alright guys, I was going to edit my code as I do this, but this seems like a worse and worse idea of just breaking my code. So I'll do the original way that I followed. So here we go. We have the newest recipe name, and then we want to also pass in ingredients. Now what we're going to do here is we're just going to set recipe this dot state newest recipe equal to an object, and then in here we're going to have recipe name of the value. And we should actually follow the same way that we were doing, which making this recipe name. And in here, pass in recipe name. And then, of course, we want to pass in ingredients as well. And we're just going to set that equal to ingredients. And then we have to go edit down here what we're doing. So not only do we want to update by passing in the value, we actually want to go ahead and take this and say this instead of newest state. We haven't, let's go ahead and deconstruct this. So we're going to pass in newest state here now, or newest recipe rather. And we're going to pass in newest recipe dot ingredients, just to short it up a little bit. So newest recipe dot ingredients. Let's go ahead and save that. And at this point, what should happen is nope, it's compiled successfully. What should happen is when we add a recipe, we should be able to enter some stuff here. Cool. So because it's updating, update new recipe, this dot update new recipe is, so I didn't name that, did I? I named it differently. So we'll just go ahead and change that and follow the same naming convention that we did before. Update new recipe. Said newest recipe name. Update new recipe was a much better name. I don't know what I was thinking when I did newest recipe name. That should work just fine. Let's go ahead and test it real quick, make sure there's no issues. Add recipe. Just go ahead and type in Dylan. Everything's working. Cool. So let's go ahead and now we will add in the ingredients. The ingredients are going to be a little bit different because we have to split the values, and the reason for that is the way that we're inputting our ingredients is the text area that adds a new value every comma. So we're not doing a new input for each one, but that would also probably be an okay way of going about it. So let's go ahead and copy this just so that we save ourselves some time writing things. Oh, in our form group, they actually assigned this control ID. This came with it. I actually should probably look this up. Control ID, but my understanding is it's just an ID. We call this form basic text. Take this, and then here we're going to copy that. And in our form group here, we're going to give this a control ID of equal to form controls text area. And again, this is all in the documentation of React Bootstrap. So instead of a text, what we want is a text area, right? As I had mentioned. And instead of the value being the value being, that's what I'm looking for. So the value being the ingredients, or the recipe name is going to be ingredients. So before, instead of on change here, let's go ahead and change our on change. In this case, it's still update new recipe because we're passing it in all the same, except instead of passing in the event.target.value, we're going to pass in here newest recipe dot recipe name. So we're just resetting the value of that, passing that in, and in here we want to set event.target.value I'm going to set that, except we want to split it on every comma. Now let's make sure that is working. What am I missing? Oh yeah, let's add a placeholder and then a value. So we'll add our placeholder, enter ingredients, separate by commas. You guys ever see an error in your code and wondering why it works? So let's just play this out and hopefully. Why is that working? You know, man, don't look a gift horse in the mouse. We're just going to continue on. So in here, what we have is value. We're going to set that equal to newest recipe dot ingredients. All right. Whew. A lot of stuff going on here so far. Now, let's make sure it's all working because that's a big deal. So every time we just want to go ahead and console log. It's going to re-render every time, right? Console.log. And in here, we just wanted to output newest recipe. So basically, every keystroke should be newest recipe getting put out when we call our add function here. So let's go ahead and turn inspect. So you can see that it's updating right here, recipe name, and then we'll put a space, repeat it, and then we'll do. And what we should get is Israel, Dylan. So we have our. Let's open that up. Let's open up one of these. So you can see that everything's working. Sweet, everything's working. That's always good. You hear that desperate sense of, oh my god, I hope it's all working so I don't have to pause the video again. So now what we want to do is we want to save the newest recipe to our recipe list. Not too bad. Let's go ahead and add that save functionality here. Now, after the modal body comes the modal.footer. All right, comes the modal.footer. Now that we have that, we're just going to have a button that on click does some stuff. Let's go ahead and close our button here. All right, so on click, pass in our callback function here that fires off an event, and this is going to call this dot save new recipe. Let's go ahead and define this this dot save new recipe. Let's go ahead and change that. And here what we want is saves a new recipe to recipes. And we have a function in save new recipe that says So the first thing we want to do is define our function, save new recipe. And in here, again, we're going to take our recipes array and we're going to slice it. So this dot state dot recipes dot slice. So we're copying that. Very nice. After that, what we want to do is we want to push to the recipes array. So we're going to take recipes dot push. And you know what? Originally, I didn't pass anything into here, so I'm going to continue that, but the better way of doing it would be to pass in newest recipe. You know what? No, we'll just do that. This is something that should work. And we're going to pass in newest recipe, and then down here, let's go ahead and say this dot right here. We're going to pass in newest recipe here as well. So that's going to pass in this dot state dot newest recipe. We're going to push that item, that object rather, onto our new recipes, and then we're going to set the state of the new recipe, of recipes rather. So we're going to say this dot set state, and in here we're going to say recipes. So that's going to set recipes, and after that we want to go ahead and reset our value of the newest recipe back to the defaults which we had before, because if we just added a recipe, when they go back to the modal, we don't want to have the old values in, so we want to set that state as well. So this dot set state, pass in the object, newest recipe, colon, and then we have an object, and then we have recipe name, and recipe name is an empty string, and then we have ingredients, which is a empty array. All right, but we're also not done yet. We also want to close the save button. We added a button and we want it to close after we click it, so we can go ahead this dot close. That's going to now close that modal. If everything works accordingly, we should have a new piece to the pie, if you will. So Dylan loves pizza. And I forgot to add save recipe, but that should work. So it looks like we have a mistake. Cannot read map of undefined. What is that? Recipe.ingredients.map. All right, let's see. Where's that crashing? It's crashing there, but why is it crashing there? So let's go ahead and throw a debugger here and actually see if this is getting hit or if there's another issue. So recipes.map. Oh, I did run into this issue where sometimes it thought there were no recipes. So we have to do this anyhow. I think this will solve it. Where, say you start with 0 recipes, if you don't have logic in there for if there's no recipes, it will actually crash. And the way that we can solve that is pretty simple. And we'll do that right now to see if that will help with this issue. Is we're just going to throw a simple if statement in here, and we're going to take our recipes array, and we're going to say, look, if the length is greater than 0, go ahead and output this code. Now, what's the code? It's everything that's in this accordion right now. So everything that's in the accordion, we want to output. Where is our accordion? Bam. And bam. Let's see if that solves our issue, because that's going to be an issue that I came across later on. I was going to wait to showcase that, but if that solves what we're trying to do here, dope. So we'll say this.recipes. We'll say Dylan loves pizza, and then save it. So it's hitting it. Recipes has 4 items in it now. You can see there, because we're pushing to it. We're slicing it. Save it. Run it. Ooh, we're still having that issue. Recipe ingredients dot map. So The next issue we're having is that all of our recipes are failing right here. How do we solve that? Alright guys, so here is my error. You'll see here, I console logged out our recipes array, and it's actually outputting newest recipe in there. Just a simple little logic mistake that we made by doing what I said I shouldn't have done, which is change my goddamn code! So don't make my mistakes. So instead, we will pass in here, we'll just pass in, instead of pushing to recipes, and newest recipe here, let's go ahead and take that out. I'll do it the same way I did it before. And jump back up. So save new recipe. We can take all this out now. And recipes, we want to push recipe name, and that's going to be this dot state dot newest recipe dot recipe name, and ingredients, and it's going to be this dot state dot newest recipe dot recipe name, dot ingredients. All right, let's save that and hope for the best. But I think we should be good here. Let's stop our debugger there. And add a new recipe, and Dylan will get his pizza. Save it. Bam. And then Dylan love pizza. Cool. So we've added add recipe, delete recipe, and again, there's no local storage, but we'll fix that in a second. Let's go ahead and fix that button that we forgot to add some text to. And this will be save new recipe. And you'll notice that when we hit it, everything's cleared here as well. All right, so we basically have two things left to do. We have to edit a recipe, and we have to then convert everything to work with local storage, which was a little bit harder than expected. So we'll do that. All right, so let's do edit. A little bit harder than expected because I was still trying to maintain the state. Now, I don't know that you need to, but in this case I did. So we are going to define the edit. Is it edit recipe? What do I call this nonsense? We're going to define another modal because remember, this is slightly different. And each modal is going to take in a different value. We're going to have a unique modal for each output. The reason for that is I want to pass in the index value, and this was kind of the easiest way of doing it. Again, maybe not the best, but that's neither here nor there right now. So within our accordion, within our mapping of recipes, right here, we are going to create a new modal. And in the interest of time, because we already went through this, I'm going to copy pasta some of this over. So we're going to paste in our modal. And in here, we're going to have this .show edit. Now remember, when we have our show, which was show add, we're going to go ahead and add a show edit, but a show edit state here. And we're going to set that to false by default. We're also going to need to go and to our open function. Is it open? No, this .close. And we're going to do another else ifs here. It says else if this .state .show edit. We can go ahead and this .set state show edit is false, right? Now, as I look at this, we could probably have done a ternary and eliminated one of these. This could probably actually even just be an else, but we're not going to worry too much about that right now. All right, so let's go piece by piece here. So we've already set the label. We have our close button. We have our on hide. We edit recipe. We have our input, which is our recipe name. And then here you'll see I have this thing called current index. Now, the reason for this is a little bit of local storage, as well as we actually only want to change the value of the current index that we are iterating through in recipes. To set the state, rather. So, here we have current index. Now, by default, I created a state that I just initialized to 0. It doesn't really matter. We're going to reset that value every single time. And what we're going to do here is current index is going to be set. Let's actually go into our render here. We can get rid of this console log. Current index. Set that as a state. In open, remember we had our open function? We're going to have on edit here. We're going to say on click. We want to set this equal to a function. And this is going to take in the event. We're not going to do anything with it, but we're going to say this dot open, and in here, this case is show edit. That's going to be the state that we're going to be editing, and we're going to pass in index. This is where we're going to set current index. So when we go to open, we're going to set that to true, and we're also going to say this dot, and here we want to change that to index. I'm going to say this dot, actually change that to current index. This dot set state of the object, current index, wham bam, and that's our edit button. That's going to open up the correct modal as well. So here we go. We got a, oh, excuse me, we don't actually, did I throw that in the panel? I didn't mean to throw that in there. I forgot I changed this so that it didn't repeat as I wanted it to. So in our modal, let's go ahead and cut that out. And we actually output it outside of the accordion. Nice. Cool. So that's why I had current index outside of there, so I didn't have to do that, which just makes more sense. Let me actually format this document real quick. I keep on getting this error, so I may actually piece by piece this in here real quick, guys. Oh, I know what the error is from. So you'll see that I don't have a container around this right here. This div is going around the whole thing, but I actually need a div around this. You see this? We need a div wrapping around the accordion. Otherwise, it's not going to work for our JSX. So let's go ahead and wrap that around the accordion and the modal here, / div. There we go. That'll fix that. And now we're all good. Okay. So we fixed this, we fixed close, we edit the recipe, we fixed open, we have recipe name. It's targeting the current index that we're on of the recipe name. We're calling this update recipe name function that takes in the value and the current index. Let's go ahead and set that update recipe name. And we'll go ahead and set this updates recipe name. And we'll say update recipe name. And update recipe name takes in, where are you? The recipe name as well as the current index. Cool. All right. And what we want to do, again, we want to not mutate directly the state. So we're going to say let recipes equals this dot recipes dot slice. This dot state dot recipes dot slice. And from here, what we want to do is we then want to say, look, recipes, and then target with our current index is equal to an object, and in that object we have recipe name. We're going to set that equal to our value we're passing in here. And then we are going to say ingredients is equal to this dot, actually, we say recipes, current index, dot ingredients. So now we've set the state and we've essentially reset the ingredient value here. And finally, we actually want to, we now are setting the state for recipes back to itself. This is going to allow us to update the recipe name. We're almost there, guys. Like I said, a lot of functions on this one. And I think I wrote one too many functions where we can actually probably, if I thought about it, combine about 3 of these where we're resetting the recipe name. I just didn't think about it at the time. So definitely some room for refactoring, which is equally important when you write your code, right? So a lot of times you write it and you're like, oh, this makes sense. Then you go back, especially when you do a video for the public. And you're like, oh, damn, man, you should maybe have refactored this before you did it. But we'll worry about that later. All right, so now that we did that, what we want to do, and let's make sure we don't have any compiling errors. No duplicate props allowed, line 139. What? I don't know about this right now, but it doesn't seem to be breaking anything, so we're going to worry about that later. All right, so the last piece that we have here is this onChange. So we have our ingredients, it's a text area, and we're going to write this update ingredients function. Now you'll see it's taking in the value, it's splitting it, and then it has the current index. And then the value here, again, we're targeting with the current index and the ingredients. Same sort of idea, except we're updating instead of adding. So let's go ahead and write our update ingredients, right? That's what we called it. We'll just put update ingredients. Again, I spelled ingredients wrong. All right, so we are taking in an update ingredients. We are taking in ingredients. And we are also taking in the current index. And finally, we are going to then slice the array, create our copy. We are then going to target that, and we'll say recipes, current index is equal to the object recipe dot recipe name, and this is going to be recipes current index dot recipe name. Sorry guys, I'm getting tired, man. This is a long video. I apologize. And then I'm like dazing off as I'm trying to look at the text there. Ingredients, and in here we're just going to go ahead and pass in ingredients. Okay, so we've updated locally our recipes. We are then going to set the state of recipes, re-update the state rather. This dot set state. Whew. Okay, we're almost there, boys. We're almost there. If you've stuck with me this long, thank you. Thank you, and good for you. Again, I've only been working with this stuff for about 3 weeks. So I apologize if I don't have the best practices, but we'll figure it out together. All right, so notice how we have an issue right here. Somehow this isn't coming through, so we have to go and fix that. So let's go see why it's not connecting. Did we not set the value properly? Ah, here it is. So remember when I told you I spelled ingredients wrong everywhere? That might be that might be it. One more time. There we go. So we want to say, we want to change this one to say bring sexy back. We want to change that to Dylan12. So something's not working. And this worked, but this didn't work. So I'm going to say that it's probably the same issue where when I went to here, on change event, current value, values is recipe.currentIndex.recipe name. So update recipe name. Let's take a look. We have let recipes equal that. And right there. So we got to pass in that object. And that should solve that. One more time. This is good. Good debugging. A lot of you guys tell me to leave my bugs in here. Don't worry. There's plenty for us to learn from. All right. So here we make that Dylan12, Smart 3. Let's add one more, and we'll just say Dylan. I don't know. And then we'll close it. And bam. So you'll see not only did we edit it, we also added one. Delete works. Add. Why is it add working? What did I do wrong? So add doesn't work. So this dot close. Let's get rid of this else. I think that else should be. Let's see if that does it. Show edit, show add. It failed. We're gonna try this one more time. So we edited some stuff. Cool. Close. We add some stuff. Okay. So there's clearly an error. It's failing on line 105 right here. Cannot read property recipe name of undefined. Recipes current index. Dot recipe name. That is line 105. Alright guys, I'm pretty sure I found the error here. So I forgot that I changed this show open, or excuse me, open, and right here we need to pass in current index because we have an optional parameter, or we have a required parameter, which we didn't add it. That's why our add was breaking there. Now let's go ahead and make sure our add is working again. It is. Thank the baby Jesus. Alright. Save our recipe, everything's good. Okay, so we have all our functionality working now. We can delete, we can edit, we can add. The only thing that we have left to do is make sure that we can get local storage to work. Now, if you're not familiar with how to tell, let's go into, let's see here, is it sources, network, performance, memory, where is it? It's in here somewhere. Application, here we go, local storage. So you can see right here, this is from previous things. I think if I clear the cache, it may delete it. So this is from a previous local storage example. Let's see if we can delete this. wonder if we can, how do we delete it? All right, so there, we deleted our local storage. We'll delete the rest of these as well. So this is from a previous example, why the local storage is there. Now we want to actually create some new local storage. How do we do that? It's not too bad. It's not too shabby, rather. And we're just going to go through our functions and set the local storage, and we're going to get the local storage. So we're going to use component did mount. Now, if you're not familiar with component did mount, it basically means things got outputted. Our component loads. Now let's run this code. That's what component did mount does. And so that's where we're going to get or set our recipes array, and we're going to get our local items. So at this point in time, we want to actually go and delete all of this. Now, if you didn't throw that if statement that I did, you're going to have an issue. So make sure you throw that if statement in your accordion. Now, in our component did mount, here we are here, we want to set our local storage. So we're going to create a temporary variable here called recipes, let recipes. And we're going to set that equal to, because it stores it as a JSON, which is just a string, it stores it as a string in JSON form. We need to parse that string so that we can turn that string into an object. And we're going to JSON.parse local storage.get item. So this is going to get the item recipes. Now, I don't think I checked to see what would happen if we don't have the item, but if it doesn't have the item, we're just going to go ahead and set it to equal to an empty array. Set it by default to an empty array. And then from here, we're going to say this dot set state is equal to an empty, or excuse me, to recipes. Not set, there we go. Recipes. Very nice. Now let's see what's going on here. Cool. So right now you'll see that our recipes are empty, as they should be. Next thing that we need to do is simply set the state of recipes pretty much everywhere where we update our state. And we have to do it before so, because set state, if you do it after the fact, say we were actually to, in this case, I'll show you exactly what's going to happen. Say local storage dot set item. This is how we're going to update our local storage. And in here, we're going to pass in what is it that in our local storage we're targeting. We're targeting recipes. And because we converted our object, because we converted our string into an object so that we could use it in our JavaScript, to send it back to the local storage, we need to then make it a string again. So we're going to call JSON.stringify. And we're going to pass in this. Where do I set this? This dot state dot recipes. Recipes. So we're just going to set it equal to recipes here. So the reason that we can't set it after is this is actually an asynchronous call that is running, and what's going to happen is that when we set it here, or actually I think I fixed this, because originally I was trying to set it directly to the state. I didn't want to do that, but if you try to set it to the state itself, you've heard it say this.state.recipes in there, while it's running that, it will then update your local storage, which will be the previous value, and I'll never actually update it. I don't think we have anything to worry about for this, but all we have to do here is update, put this one line, because we already have our values here. Basically everywhere where we update the state. Might be better to write a function to do this. I didn't think about that at the time. Just so that you call the function, but it's one line of code for the time being. And everywhere where we update recipes, we want to throw this. So let's see, update recipe name, update ingredients, and then here we want to save new recipe, pass that in there as well. And then we want to update new recipe, paste that in there. We want to delete recipe, we want to pass that in there. And I think that's everything. Let's go ahead and close this and make sure recipes is not defined line 32. Okay, what did we do? 32. Oh, that's updated new recipe. We don't care about that. Save that. Let's go ahead and reflect on this. All right, cool. So we're gonna add a recipe here. We're gonna say Dylan makes code projects. I don't know. Save the new recipe, and wham bam, you'll see right here, it's our value is right there. So when we refresh this page, it's actually going to pull that from the local storage, and bam, there we go. We're good to go. And same thing when we delete it, you'll see that it got deleted as well. So that's it. That's the project. Congratulations if you stuck through. I hope you guys learned a little bit about React. Again, I've only been working with it for 3 weeks. We've already discussed some of the ways that we can improve upon this project, but we have accomplished our original goal here that was for the React project. Some ways that we can improve it. We talked about adding validation with the inputs so that you always have to have a recipe name and you always have to have at least one ingredient. We've talked about maybe refactoring some of the set functions into 1 or 2, and we've talked about rewriting a function for the set item of local storage. These are all things that we could do, and I believe we can actually maybe even delete this from state because this is initializing it, and we don't need that anymore. Now, there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed this project. Thank you so much for watching. The source code for all of this, along with all my other projects, is on my GitHub. A lot of you have been asking me for about 1.5 years to start pushing my code, and I have. Not all of it yet, but the new stuff is pushed. I'm going to get the old stuff out so it doesn't look like I'm a chump. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me, you can at patreon.com. And join our Facebook group, Code Tech and Caffeine, Discord channel, all that great stuff. Links are in the description. I appreciate you guys watching, man. Hey, guys, thanks for watching the video. Special thanks to our sponsors, Dev Mountain. If you're looking for a coding bootcamp where tuition and housing is included, definitely check them out. Appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next video.